Long before the present conflicts of Runeterra, before the rise of Noxus or the founding of Demacia, there existed an empire unlike any other. Shurima was not merely a kingdom or a nation. It was a dominion of gods among mortals, a civilization built on the will of ascended beings and the unbreakable faith of its people. The Golden Capital stood as a beacon of power in the vast, sun-scorched deserts, radiating divine authority across the continent. It was a time of unquestioned order, of kings who ruled as god-emperors, and of a city that was thought to be eternal. But no empire, no matter how powerful, is truly immortal. Shurima's downfall was not a sudden collapse, nor the result of an external invasion. It was a betrayal woven from within, a fate written in the very foundation of its greatness. The sands of time would bury its once proud structures, and with them, the stories of ambition, loyalty, and ruin. Legends would persist, whispered among those who still walked the desert's shifting dunes. But the truth of Shurima's fall would remain obscured by myth and speculation. What had once been the center of civilization became a wasteland, scattered with forgotten relics and silent ruins. But the echoes of its past had not faded completely. Some remnants of its ancient glory still endure, fragments of a lost empire, pieces of a history too grand to be erased. To understand how Shurima, the shining jewel of Runeterra, fell into ruin, we must first understand the forces that shaped its rise, the figures who once wielded its power, the decisions that led to its undoing, and the moment when its golden age came crashing down, leaving behind only dust and memory. This is the story of Shurima's fall. At the heart of Shurima's fall were figures of immense power and influence, beings whose ambitions, loyalties, and choices shaped the fate of the empire. Some sought to preserve its glory, others to reshape it, and some, knowingly or not, played a role in its undoing. Their stories would become legends, their names whispered in the shifting sands long after Shurima had crumbled into ruin. The empire was ruled by its Sun Emperor, a figure believed to be divinely ordained, chosen to guide the people under the watchful gaze of the sun. More than a ruler, the emperor was a symbol of stability, a living conduit between the mortal and celestial realms. His authority was absolute, yet his power was not his own. It was drawn from the empire's foundation, a structure upheld by a system far older than any single ruler. Standing at the emperor's side was the ascended host, a sacred order of warriors transformed by the divine power of the sun disk. These beings, no longer merely human, were the empire's ultimate defenders. Each had once been a mortal of great merit, chosen to undergo a sacred ritual that granted them superhuman strength, heightened senses, and lifespans that stretched beyond ordinary limits. They were revered as demigods, living embodiments of Shurima's divine right to rule. Yet, despite their unity, each had their own ambitions, beliefs, and loyalties. Among the empire's elite was a trusted general, one of the greatest military minds of the era. He had served with unwavering dedication, leading Shurima's armies to countless victories. His loyalty was unquestioned, his brilliance unmatched. He stood not only as a warrior, but as a visionary, a man who believed in a future beyond the traditions that had bound the empire for centuries. His influence stretched far beyond the battlefield, shaping the decisions that would steer the course of Shurima's fate. The priesthood of the empire, keepers of sacred rites and custodians of divine knowledge, held their own place of power. They ensured the rituals of ascension were performed with precision, guarding the sacred texts and secrets of the empire's divine order. Their influence over the people was immense, for it was they who interpreted the will of the gods, guiding emperors and rulers alike in matters of faith. Yet even among them, beliefs differed. Some were devoted to the empire's traditions, while others sought to challenge them. Shurima's common people, though often overlooked in the grand designs of their rulers, were the foundation upon which the empire stood. Merchants, artisans, scholars, and soldiers each played a role in maintaining the vast, complex society that allowed the Golden Capital to thrive. Their faith in the empire and its leadership was unshaken, for they had known no other world. But the destiny of a civilization does not rest solely in the hands of rulers. The consequences of their actions would shape the lives of all who lived beneath them. Beyond the empire's borders, rival factions watched from the shadows, their interests entwined with Shurima's fate. The desert was home to those who had never bowed to its rule, nomadic tribes, ancient bloodlines, and scattered settlements that had endured long before Shurima rose to power. Some saw the empire as a beacon of civilization, while others viewed it as a force of oppression. In its downfall, they saw opportunity, whether for freedom, revenge, or something greater. And then there were those who stood outside the known order, figures whose presence was felt but never fully understood. Their influence lingered in the periphery, shaping events in ways unseen. Some whispered of hidden forces, of knowledge lost to time, of things that should not have been tampered with. Whether their actions were deliberate or incidental, their presence was undeniable. Each of these players, in their own way, shaped the events that led to the fall of Shurima. Some sought power, others sought change, and some merely sought to survive. But fate does not bend to the will of any single individual. It moves like the shifting sands, slow, relentless, and inescapable. Shurima's fall was not a singular event, nor was it the result of a single act of betrayal. It was a catastrophe that had been set in motion long before the final moment arrived, shaped by years of expansion, ambition, and the rigid traditions that had defined the empire's existence. The forces that would lead to its collapse were deeply rooted in the very foundation of its power, slowly unraveling the order that had once seemed unbreakable. The empire had been built on a belief in divine right, an unquestioned faith that the Sun Emperor ruled not by mere authority, but by celestial mandate. This belief was reinforced through the ritual of ascension, a sacred process in which those deemed worthy were elevated beyond mortality, granted power that placed them above all others. It was this system that had allowed Shurima to dominate the lands for centuries, standing unchallenged in its supremacy. Yet, for all its grandeur, this same structure created fractures that would prove impossible to mend. One of the first and most significant pressures on the empire was the burden of its own expansion. At its height, Shurima stretched farther than any before it, consuming distant lands and drawing countless people under its rule. But with such vast control came a growing strain. The further the empire spread, the more difficult it became to maintain order. Distant territories, once eager to align with the Golden Capital, began to feel the weight of Shurima's demands. Resentment grew in places where the empire's authority was enforced with an iron grip, where local customs and traditions were suppressed in favor of Shuriman law. The balance that had once held the empire together began to shift, creating tensions that would only worsen over time. Beneath the surface, rivalries and divisions were taking shape. The process of ascension, once seen as the highest honor, had become a source of contention. Though meant to elevate only the most deserving, it became clear that the selection was not always impartial. Political maneuvering and personal ambition played a role, leading to whispers of corruption among those who held power. Some believed the system had become flawed, that the ceremony had strayed from its original purpose. But to question it was to question the gods themselves, a challenge few were willing to make openly. At the same time, the balance between the mortal rulers and the ascended warriors had grown increasingly unstable. Though both were meant to serve the empire, the power wielded by the ascended far surpassed that of any ruler. Their strength, their lifespans, their very existence made them something beyond human, yet they were expected to serve under those who would eventually wither and die. Some among them began to wonder if their place in the empire should be greater than what tradition dictated. While loyalty to Shurima remained strong, the nature of that loyalty was beginning to change. The priesthood, once a stabilizing force, had also become a point of contention. Their role as interpreters of divine will placed them at the center of many decisions, yet even among them, differences in belief had emerged. Some sought to preserve the old ways, believing that any deviation would lead to ruin. Others saw an opportunity for transformation, a path toward a stronger, more unified empire. But such disagreements were not openly discussed. They were fought in whispers and unseen struggles for influence, creating hidden fractures within the very institution that upheld Shurima's divine order. And beyond the empire, the world itself was shifting. Forces that had remained distant for centuries were growing stronger, their presence felt in ways that could not be ignored. The empire had once seemed untouchable, but no power is truly absolute. Whether through external threats, internal corruption, or the ambitions of those who sought to reshape destiny itself, the stability that had defined Shurima for so long was beginning to erode. The empire stood at a crossroads, unaware that it was already too late to turn back. The pieces had been set, the foundations weakened beyond repair. What came next was inevitable. The fall of Shurima had already begun. The final days of Shurima were marked by a sequence of events that unfolded with unstoppable momentum, each moment leading the empire further into collapse. What had once seemed unshakable crumbled piece by piece as decisions made in the pursuit of power led to irreversible consequences. The turning point was approaching, but long before it came, the empire was already unraveling. The first signs of disruption were subtle. Within the heart of the empire, whispers of change spread through the corridors of power. Conflicting visions for Shurima's future created divisions among those who once stood united. While the official rule of the Sun Emperor remained unquestioned, the forces that upheld his dominion, political advisors, military leaders, the ascended warriors, began to pull in different directions. There were those who sought to preserve tradition, believing the empire's strength came from its unbroken legacy. Others saw a future where Shurima would not simply endure, but evolve, even if that meant challenging long-held beliefs. The tensions that had simmered for years began to manifest openly. Border territories long under the empire's control grew restless. Some saw the empire's expansion as unsustainable, believing the resources drained to maintain its reach had weakened the core. In some regions, conflicts arose between local rulers and Shuriman officials. Disagreements that once would have been swiftly resolved now lingered, unresolved. The signs of growing instability were ignored by many, dismissed as minor disturbances rather than warnings of what was to come. At the center of it all was a momentous decision. The sacred rituals of ascension, which had for centuries determined the divine order of the empire, were about to be tested in a way they never had before. The ceremony that had granted power to Shurima's greatest champions was now the focal point of something far greater. It was no longer merely a rite of passage for warriors and protectors. It had become the key to reshaping the very foundation of the empire. This moment, though not yet fully understood by those witnessing it, would set the course for everything that followed. As the ceremony began, the air in the golden capital grew heavy with anticipation. The sun disk, a relic of immeasurable power, stood at the heart of the ritual, its energy drawn forth in a spectacle unseen for generations. The gathered crowd, from nobles to commoners, watched as the empire's most sacred rite was enacted once more. But something was different this time. The forces at play, the ambitions intertwined with this ascension, carried consequences that no one had foreseen. It was in this moment that everything changed. In an instant, the foundations of the ceremony collapsed. A surge of raw power, beyond mortal control, tore through the very fabric of the ritual. The energies unleashed did not bring forth the promised divinity, but instead shattered everything in their path. The sky above the capital darkened. The golden structures that had stood for centuries trembled as waves of uncontrolled magic spread outward. The heart of the empire was consumed in an instant. What should have been a moment of triumph became a cataclysm. The aftershock of the failed ascension was immediate. The golden capital, the very core of Shurima's might, was devastated beyond recognition. Those who had once walked its grand streets, who had believed in the unbreakable destiny of the empire, found themselves standing amidst ruins. But the destruction of the city was only the beginning. Across the empire, the collapse of the capital sent ripples through every province and territory. Without the seat of power to anchor them, regions that had once sworn loyalty to the emperor now found themselves without direction. Panic spread as the realization took hold. Shurima was no longer whole. The figures who had once defined its greatness were gone, the structures that had upheld its rule now crumbling. Some sought to restore order, believing that the empire could still be salvaged. Others saw the collapse as an opportunity, breaking away from what remained to carve out their own paths. The stability that had defined Shurima for centuries was gone in a single moment, and with it, the Golden Empire began to fade into history. Yet, even as the sands buried the ruins, the memory of what had happened would not be so easily erased. The fall of Shurima was not merely an end. It was the beginning of something new, a wound upon the world that would never fully heal. The events that had led to its destruction were complete, but the consequences were only beginning to take shape. At the heart of Shurima's downfall was a single moment, one decision, one act that altered the fate of an empire that had stood for centuries. Everything that came before had led to this, and everything that followed was dictated by its consequences. The ceremony meant to mark the next era of Shurima's rule instead became the spark that ignited its ruin. The decision to undergo ascension had always been seen as an honor, a process reserved for warriors, guardians, and those who had proven their worth. But this time, it was different. The ritual was no longer about creating a protector. It was about reshaping the order of the empire itself. The one who stood at the center of this moment was not a warrior chosen by the gods, but a ruler who sought to transcend mortality, to claim the power that had always been bestowed upon others. This was not an ascension like those that had come before. It was an attempt to merge divine right with divine power, to break the cycle of rulers who withered and died while their champions endured. The decision was made with conviction, though not all who witnessed it agreed. Some saw it as the next step in Shurima's evolution, the final proof that its rule was absolute and unquestionable. Others viewed it as a deviation from the sacred order, a challenge to traditions that had defined the empire for generations. But the voices of dissent were too late to change the course of what had already begun. The sun disk, the ancient construct that had for centuries been the source of ascension, was prepared for the ritual. The energy required for such a transformation was immense, drawn from forces that few truly understood. Unlike the warriors before, who had each undergone the process through careful guidance and divine selection, this ascension carried the weight of an entire empire upon its shoulders. The ritual began, the power surged, and for a brief moment, everything seemed as it should be. Then something went wrong. The energy released was beyond control, greater than anything the ritual had ever harnessed before. The forces that had once granted strength and clarity now twisted into something unstable, raw, and unpredictable. The sun disk, the very heart of Shurima's divine power, shuddered as the ritual spiraled beyond control. The skies darkened. The golden light that had once symbolized Shurima's greatness now cast long, ominous shadows. Those who had gathered to witness history stood frozen as the moment turned from triumph to catastrophe. The process of ascension did not complete as intended. Instead of bestowing power as it had done so many times before, it fractured, its energies lashing out indiscriminately. The divine balance that had sustained the empire was broken in an instant. The golden capital, the seat of Shurima's might, became the epicenter of a disaster that no one had foreseen. Structures that had stood for generations began to crack, the very ground beneath them shifting as the forces unleashed spread outward. What was meant to be the dawn of a new era became the death knell of an empire. In that moment, the hierarchy that had ruled Shurima for centuries ceased to exist. The empire's foundation was not just shaken, it was shattered. The faith of its people, the unity of its warriors, the belief in its divine order, All of it collapsed under the weight of what had just occurred. Those who had once sworn loyalty now stood amidst ruin, faced with a reality that could not be undone. The Golden Capital, once the beacon of civilization, had become a graveyard of its own ambition. The echoes of what transpired would stretch far beyond the moment itself, reshaping not just the empire, but the world around it. And as the dust settled, the question remained. Had this been a miscalculation, or had the downfall of Shurima been inevitable from the very beginning? The fall of Shurima was not an isolated tragedy. Its collapse sent shockwaves across the world, reshaping the balance of power and altering the course of history. What had once been the center of civilization, a beacon of dominance and divine authority, was now nothing more than a graveyard buried beneath shifting sands. The Golden Capital, once the heart of the empire, lay in ruins, and with it, the order that had governed an entire continent crumbled. The immediate aftermath was defined by chaos. The destruction of the capital severed the unifying force that had held the empire together. Without the emperor, without the sun disk, and without the structure that had given Shurima its identity, the provinces that had once been loyal now found themselves untethered. The vast roads that once connected the empire became abandoned paths. Cities that had thrived under Shuriman rule were left without guidance, and trade routes that had been essential to the empire's prosperity fell into disuse. What had once been a single, united force fragmented overnight, with regions turning inward to survive. Among those who had lived under Shurima's rule, confusion turned to desperation. Some tried to cling to the past, hoping that the empire could be rebuilt, that a new ruler would rise and restore order. But the truth was unavoidable. Shurima was gone. Without the divine mandate of the emperor, without the celestial authority that had granted the empire its legitimacy, there was no way to restore what had been lost. The faith that had bound the people together now became a source of grief, as the collapse of the ascension ritual was seen not only as a failure of leadership, but as a rejection from the heavens themselves. For those who had once served the empire, the fall created a new reality. The military forces that had once marched under Shurima's banners now found themselves without command. Some sought to maintain order, becoming warlords in their own right, attempting to carve out territories from the ruins. Others abandoned their posts entirely, fading into the deserts, unwilling to fight for a cause that no longer existed. The warrior caste that had been elevated to near-mythical status was left fractured, their loyalty now a burden with no empire to uphold. The collapse of Shurima also reshaped the lands beyond its former borders. Neighboring civilizations, once fearful of its power, now saw opportunity. Territories that had once been conquered by Shurima began to reassert their independence. The absence of its dominance allowed old rivalries to resurface, as factions that had long been suppressed now fought to reclaim their lands. In the absence of imperial authority, power struggles erupted as new rulers sought to rise from the ashes of what had once been the greatest empire in the known world. The deserts themselves began to claim what remained. Without the infrastructure that had kept the empire alive, many of its grand cities were swallowed by the sands, abandoned to time. The roads that had once connected the empire crumbled. Temples and monuments that had once stood as testaments to divine rule became ruins, their significance fading as the years passed. The knowledge, culture, and advancements that had once defined Shurima were lost, preserved only in scattered artifacts and the memories of those who had witnessed its fall. But not all remnants of Shurima were destroyed. The collapse left behind artifacts of immense power, relics imbued with the energy of the failed ascension, their purposes no longer clear. Some who wandered the ruins uncovered these remnants, drawn to the echoes of what had once been. These artifacts would later find their way into the hands of those who sought to understand the past, or to use its lost power for their own ends. The fall of Shurima marked the end of an age. Where once there had been order, there was now only ruin. Where once there had been faith, There was now only doubt. The Golden Empire, which had seemed eternal, had become nothing more than a legend, a cautionary tale of power lost to ambition. And though its name would not be forgotten, its place in the world had been forever changed. One of the most discussed aspects of Shurima's fall is the failed ascension and the sheer magnitude of the event's impact. While ascension had long been a ritual reserved for those deemed worthy, the attempt to elevate a ruler to a godlike status was unprecedented. The exact mechanics of the process, the reasons for its failure, and the true nature of the sun disk's power remain subjects of intense speculation among those who study Shuriman history. Some believe that the ritual was doomed from the start, while others argue that an external force may have interfered. The sun disk itself is at the center of much of this discussion. A construct of immense power, its origins stretch far beyond Shurima's recorded history. While it was used as a conduit for ascension, many question whether the Shurimans fully understood its capabilities. Some theories suggest that the sun disk was never meant to elevate rulers, only warriors, and that attempting to channel its energy in such a way created an instability that led to disaster. Others speculate that the device was not purely of Shuriman design, but rather something inherited from an older civilization, repurposed to fit the needs of the Empire. The exact mechanics of how the sun disk functioned remain unknown, as its secrets were lost along with the Empire itself. Another major point of discussion is the fate of those who were affected by the failed ascension. The power surge that erupted from the ritual did not simply destroy, it altered. While most perished in the collapse of the capital, there are persistent stories of individuals who survived, but not as they once were. Some accounts speak of beings changed by the raw energy of the event, figures who wandered the desert afterward, forever marked by the failed ascension. These stories, often dismissed as myths, suggest that the energies of the sun disk did not vanish entirely, but left behind remnants that continued to influence the world in unforeseen ways. The nature of the ascended warriors and how they were affected by the Empire's fall is another point of discussion. While some continued to exist long after the Empire's destruction, their purpose was lost. Without an emperor, without the structure that had defined their existence, many were left wandering, searching for meaning. Some turned to their own visions of what Shurima should have been, while others abandoned their past entirely. The shift in their behavior, the divisions that formed among them, and the way they interacted with the remnants of Shuriman culture have long fascinated those who seek to understand the true consequences of the Empire's fall. Another lingering mystery is the lost knowledge of Shurima's golden age. While many artifacts and ruins remain, the deeper secrets of its technology and magic have yet to be fully uncovered. The Empire's ability to harness solar energy, its methods of constructing massive, near-indestructible structures in the desert, and the mechanisms behind the sun disk itself were unparalleled. Some believe that remnants of this knowledge still exist, buried beneath the sands or hidden in ancient texts, waiting to be rediscovered. The idea that Shurima's lost wisdom could one day be recovered fuels both scholars and treasure seekers, each hoping to unlock the power of a civilization long gone. Perhaps the most debated question of all is whether Shurima's fall was truly inevitable. Was the attempt to ascend a ruler a mistake from the start, or was there another force at play? Some theories suggest that the Empire's enemies, both internal and external, played a role in its downfall. Others argue that Shurima had simply overreached, its power growing too great to sustain itself. The debate continues with no definitive answer, ensuring that the mystery of the Golden Empire's fall remains a topic of endless fascination. Among those who shaped the fate of Shurima, certain individuals stood above all others, figures whose ambitions, strengths, and weaknesses played a direct role in the Empire's rise and catastrophic fall. Each of them was driven by their own purpose, yet their actions intertwined, forging a path that led to the Empire's end. The ruler at the heart of Shurima's fall was a man of vision and determination. He was not content with the legacy of those who had come before him. He sought to transcend the limits of mortality, to become more than a ruler, something eternal. His belief in his divine right to ascension was unshakable, and he saw it not as ambition, but as destiny. His leadership was marked by wisdom, but also by an unwavering conviction that Shurima's greatness could only be secured through his transformation. This strength of will allowed him to expand the empire to its peak, yet it also blinded him to the warnings of those who questioned the path he had chosen. His greatest flaw was his inability to see that power, once pursued for the sake of stability, could just as easily become the cause of destruction. Standing beside him was his closest confidant, a figure whose mind was as sharp as any blade, a strategist, a scholar, and a man whose loyalty to the emperor had been forged over years of service. He was one of the few who truly understood the magnitude of what was at stake. His brilliance in matters of war and governance had made Shurima stronger, yet his loyalty left him bound to a decision he could not change. He saw the dangers ahead, the fractures forming within the empire, but his devotion prevented him from acting against what he believed was inevitable. His greatest strength was his intellect, his ability to see the larger picture, but his greatest weakness was his reluctance to challenge the one person he had sworn to follow. Among the Ascended, one warrior stood apart from the rest, a figure of unparalleled might, forged in battle and honored among Shurima's greatest champions. He was a being of duty and principle. Unlike others who questioned their place in the empire, he believed in the sanctity of the ascension process, in the role the Ascended were meant to serve. His strength lay not only in combat, but in his unwavering faith in the traditions of Shurima. Yet this very devotion would become his downfall, as he failed to see how the ritual that had once defined him was being twisted into something it was never meant to be. His struggle to reconcile his belief in the empire with the reality of its collapse would shape his actions in the years that followed. There was another whose influence over Shurima's fate was undeniable, a figure who operated in the shadows, whose presence was felt rather than seen. They were a master of subtlety, a manipulator whose words could shift the course of events without raising suspicion. Their understanding of Shuriman power was unparalleled, and while they never sought the throne, they knew how to shape the decisions of those who ruled. This ability to influence from behind the scenes was their greatest weapon, yet it also became their downfall. When the empire crumbled, their careful machinations collapsed with it, leaving them stranded in a world that no longer followed the rules they had once controlled. And then, there were those who witnessed the fall but were powerless to stop it. Scholars, advisors, warriors, figures who had dedicated their lives to the empire, who had believed in its divine destiny, only to see it all reduced to ruins. Some tried to escape, fleeing into the desert in hopes of preserving what little remained. Others refused to accept the truth, clinging to the belief that Shurima could still rise again. These were not the ones who had shaped the empire's fall, but the ones who were left behind to live with its consequences. Their stories, often forgotten, were just as important as those who had stood at the center of the collapse. Each of these individuals, whether through ambition, loyalty, faith, or deception, played a role in Shurima's fate. Some sought power, others sought wisdom, and some simply sought survival, but none of them could stop what was coming. The fall of Shurima was not the result of a single man's decision. It was the culmination of choices made by many, each pushing the empire closer to the moment when everything would break. The fall of Shurima remains one of the most debated events in Runeterra's history. While much is known about the catastrophe itself, there are lingering questions that have never been fully answered. Theories have formed over centuries, some based on fragments of ancient knowledge, others on speculation and legend. The truth, buried beneath the sands, may never be fully uncovered. One of the most enduring mysteries is why the ascension ritual failed so catastrophically. The sun disk had been used countless times before to elevate warriors into beings of immense power, yet when it was turned toward a ruler, the results were unlike anything witnessed before. Some argue that the process was never meant for a leader, that the energies required to ascend a mortal to both emperor and god were too great to control. Others believe that the ritual was sabotaged, either by someone within Shurima's own ranks or by an outside force that did not wish to see the empire grow stronger. If interference did take place, the question remains: who would have had both the knowledge and the means to disrupt such a sacred process? Another question that continues to puzzle historians is the fate of the energy that was unleashed when the ascension collapsed. The surge of power did not simply vanish, it spread outward, altering everything in its path. While many perished in the devastation, there are accounts of individuals who survived but were irrevocably changed. Some claim that fragments of this energy remain in the ruins of the capital, hidden beneath layers of sand and stone. If these remnants still exist, what effects might they have on those who come into contact with them? Could the knowledge of ascension be recovered, or has it been irreversibly lost? There is also debate over whether Shurima's fall was truly an accident or if it had been foretold long before the final moment arrived. Ancient texts speak of prophecies warning of a day when the Golden Empire would crumble, though interpretations vary. Some believe these were merely metaphors for the dangers of unchecked power, while others see them as evidence that Shurima's fate had been sealed long before the failed ascension. If such warnings existed, why were they ignored? And if they were true, does that mean Shurima was always destined to fall? Another major point of discussion is the role of the ascended warriors in the aftermath of the fall. Some remained loyal to the ideals of the empire, seeking to preserve what little was left, while others turned against the very system that had created them. Were their divisions purely ideological, or was there something deeper at play? The power granted through ascension was meant to serve the empire, but with the empire gone, many struggled to find purpose. Some vanished into the desert, their fates unknown. Were they simply lost, or did they find something new, something that still waits to be uncovered? The legacy of Shurima's fall extends beyond its ruins. Some believe that remnants of its lost civilization still lie hidden beneath the sands, waiting to be discovered. The technology, magic, and artifacts of an empire that once stood at the height of its power may yet hold secrets that could reshape the world. If such knowledge were to be recovered, would it be used to rebuild, or would it become a tool for those who seek to claim Shurima's power for themselves? Perhaps the greatest mystery is whether Shurima's fall was truly the end, or merely the beginning of something new. Though its golden age was lost, its echoes still remain. The sands have buried its past, but the question lingers. Could the empire one day rise again? And if it did, would it be a return to what was, or the birth of something entirely different? The fall of Shurima was not just the end of an empire. It was an event that reshaped the world and continues to influence the present. What was lost in the sands has not been forgotten, and the echoes of that collapse still ripple through history. The long-term consequences of the empire's downfall have altered the balance of power, changed the course of civilizations, and left behind unanswered questions about what the future might hold. One of the most significant lasting effects is the absence of Shurima's dominance. Before its fall, the empire was a stabilizing force, imposing its rule over vast territories and uniting different cultures under a single banner. With its collapse, these regions were left to fend for themselves, leading to fragmentation, conflicts, and the emergence of new powers. Some of these regions adapted and flourished independently, while others struggled to survive without the structure that Shurima had once provided. The vacuum left behind gave rise to new rulers, warlords, and factions that shaped the world in ways the empire never could have anticipated. The loss of Shurima's ascended warriors as a unified force also had profound implications. These powerful beings, once seen as the empire's greatest protectors, became scattered, divided by their own beliefs and ambitions. Some sought to uphold the ideals of the past, while others abandoned them entirely. Without a central authority to guide them, their influence shifted from that of a divine order to something far less predictable. In some cases, their continued existence posed a danger to the world, as their immense power, now untethered from purpose, could be turned toward destruction or conquest. Another lasting impact is the way Shurima's legacy is perceived. For some, it remains a cautionary tale, a warning of what happens when power is pushed beyond its limits. The failed ascension, the loss of an empire that seemed unstoppable, and the chaos that followed serve as reminders of the dangers of unchecked ambition. For others, however, Shurima represents something else entirely. A lost golden age, a civilization whose greatness might one day be restored. The ruins of its past are not merely remnants of history, but symbols of what could still be reclaimed. The idea of Shurima rising again is more than just legend. There are those who still believe that the Empire's return is not only possible, but inevitable. Some seek to restore its former glory, while others see its ruins as a source of power to be exploited. If the knowledge of ascension were to be recovered, if the secrets of the sun disk could be understood once more, it is possible that the Empire could rise from the sands. But whether this would bring a new era of prosperity or simply repeat the mistakes of the past remains uncertain. The technological and magical advancements lost with Shurima's fall also leave a lasting impact. The Empire once wielded knowledge beyond what most civilizations possess today, from solar energy manipulation to the construction of near-indestructible structures. If these secrets were to be rediscovered, they could change the balance of power once again. Some fear that such discoveries could lead to conflict, as factions seek to control what was once the greatest empire in the world. Others see it as an opportunity, an untapped well of potential that, if used wisely, could usher in a new age of innovation and progress. The cultural influence of Shurima has also endured. Though its political structure was lost, its traditions, beliefs, and stories have been passed down through generations. Myths of the ascended warriors, tales of Shurima's past rulers, and the prophecy of its return continue to shape the identities of those who descend from the Empire's former subjects. Even among those who never lived under Shurima's rule, the legacy of its power lingers in the collective memory of Runeterra. Perhaps the most important question is whether Shurima's downfall was truly the end, or merely a chapter in a much longer story. Empires have fallen before, only to be reborn in new forms. The fate of Shurima may yet be undecided. If the right knowledge is uncovered, if the right individuals rise to power, then the sands that once buried an empire may instead reveal its future. Whether this future will bring prosperity or devastation depends on those who seek to control what Shurima left behind. The world has already been shaped by its fall, but it may yet be shaped again by what comes next.